Okay, introduction to printing production. So what's this all about? So it says here that before printing was discovered, a century was equal to 8,000 years. So what does it mean? Okay, so we all know that a century is just 100 years. So why does it says that before printing was discovered, a century feels like, probably that's the way, that's the context of it. A century feels like 1,000 years, not 100 years. So why do you think is that? So it is said by Henry David Thoreau. Is one of the most famous authors in US. So he's the author of Walden. Uh, it's a very good book to read. So yun yung sabi niya. Before printing was discovered, a century was equal to 8,000 years. Why do you think is that, class? Can you elaborate on the context of this passage by Henry David Thoreau? Okay, someone's raising their hand. So yes, Angeline.
So, good afternoon po, sir. So, before po, di ba, hindi pa po uso ang machineries or wala pa pong equipment na masyadong ginagamit noon. Pero meron po tayong wood block printing, yung sa China po. Di ba, if mano-mano po or if mano-mano po nating ipiprint yung mga letters kung magpo-produce ka po ng madaming copies po nung, kunwari, magpiprint ka po ng announcement and kailangan po ng maraming copies po nun. So, syempre po, parang if wood block printing po ang gagamitin, parang aabutin ka nga po ng siyam-siyam sa pag-produce po nung copies po na yun. Parang ganun po.
Right.
Kaya po parang nasabi po dyan na parang century was equal to 1,000 years.
Okay, very good. Tama. I agree. Na kapag ganun nga naman yung printing process mo, yung isang announcement lang, yeah, it will take a lot of time. Okay? So yeah, parang ganun nga yung pakiramdam na kapag sobrang haba nga naman, sobrang tagal ng process, feels like 1,000 years. Yan, so si SJ may gustong mag-elaborate on this passage. Yes?
Sir, siguro po, kaya feel mo na 1,000 years, since ngayon nga, siyam-siyam po yung pag-print, pipili lang po sila nung talagang essential lang siguro. Unlike now po na marami kang pwedeng i-print, like, pwede yung day-to-day na balita, ganon. Pero if noon po, dahil wala pa nga pong printing, parang matagal po yung pagitan ng mga pangyayari. So, pakiramdam mo, ay, masyado na tong matagal bago ulit magkaroon ng isa pang panibagong balita. Kasi nga po, it takes time to create something. Kaya po, hindi po siguro sila palaging magpiprint sa mga wood kasi nga po, it takes time po. Ayun.
Yes, correct. It takes time. So the transfer of knowledge through printed materials takes time. So the transfer from generation to generation to generation is really difficult to do. Okay, so that's why the knowledge from 1,000 years or from just a century feels like 1,000 years already. Yes, because of the transfer of knowledge. That's correct. So I think we can accommodate one more who can interpret this quote right here before we proceed to the next slide. Okay, there's another one. Irene, yes?
Hello, sir. Good afternoon po. So, in my opinion naman po, we know na today's development is so fast. And the progress is mas mabilis. And there are maybe discoveries from the past that are not given opportunity to be written. Kaya mas nagiging matagal yung progreso ng mga tao during that time because they can't exchange those knowledge na nakakollect nila. So parang sinabi po na 1,000 years because mas matagal po yung progress ng development natin before the printing production. Yun po, sir. Thank you po.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much, Irene. Yan, tama yun, no? Kasi nga, dati, sabi nga dun sa book na binabasa ko, um, ang isang, ang information, ang data na nare-receive ng isang tao during the Edo period sa Japan, sa buong lifetime na yun, is equivalent lang sa data na nare-receive natin ngayon sa isang araw. Okay, so 1 hour of information that we receive in a day is equivalent to the information that someone from Edo period received in their lifetime. So that's the gap of we are bombarded with information right now, especially the everything that all those media that's surrounding us. So yes. So here's an overview of the discussion. So we'll talk about the Gutenberg. So it is Gutenberg, how you pronounce that. So I'm sure you have bumped into this name before. So Johansen Gutenberg. I'm sure you have heard this name before. He is the responsible or the inventor or the proprietor, the one that make the printing press successful. So Johansen Gutenberg, and so that's the era, the pre-Gutenberg, the Gutenberg era, the industrial era, the artistic era, and our current era, which is the digital era. So I'll play this video first. So if there are any issue with the audio or video, just unmute your mouth so I can fix that immediately. Okay, so kapag tahimik kayo, it means that the video is seamless. So I'll play it now.
What makes a book a book? Is it just anything that stores and communicates information? Or does it have to do with paper, binding, font, ink, its weight in your hands, the smell of the pages? Is this a book? Probably not. But is this? To answer these questions, we need to go back to the start of the book as we know it and understand how these elements came together to make something more than the sum of their parts. The earliest object that we think of as a book is the codex, a stack of pages bound along one edge. But the real turning point in book history was Johannes Gutenberg's printing press in the mid-15th century. The concept of movable type had been invented much earlier in Eastern culture, but the introduction of Gutenberg's press had a profound effect. Suddenly, an elite class of monks and the ruling class no longer controlled the production of texts. Messages could spread more easily, and copies could constantly be produced, so printing houses popped up all over Europe. The product of this bibliographic boom is familiar to us in some respects, but markedly different in others. The skeleton of the book is paper, type, and cover. More than 2,000 years ago, China invented paper as a writing surface, which was itself predated by Egyptian papyrus. However, until the 16th century, Europeans mainly wrote on thin sheets of wood and durable parchment made of stretched animal skins. Eventually, the popularity of paper spread throughout Europe, replacing parchment for most printings because it was less expensive in bulk. Inks had been made by combining organic plant and animal dyes with water or wine, but since water doesn't stick to metal type, use of the printing press required a change to oil-based ink. Printers used black ink made of a mixture of lamp soot, turpentine, and walnut oil. And what about font size and type? The earliest movable type pieces consisted of reversed letters cast in relief on the ends of lead alloy stocks. They were handmade and expensive, and the designs were as different as the people who carved their molds. Standardization was not really possible until mass manufacturing and the creation of an accessible word processing system. As for style, we can thank Nicholas Jensen for developing 2 types of Roman font that led to thousands of others, including the familiar Times Roman. Something had to hold all this together, and until the late 15th century, covers consisted of either wood or sheets of paper pasted together. These would eventually be replaced by rope fiber millboard, originally intended for high-quality bindings in the late 17th century. but later as a less expensive option. And while today's mass-produced cover illustrations are marketing tools, the cover designs of early books were made to order. Even spines have a history. Initially, they were not considered aesthetically important, and the earliest ones were flat rather than rounded. The flat form made the books easier to read by allowing the book to rest easily on a table. But those spines were damaged easily from the stresses of normal use. A rounded form solved that issue, although new problems arose, like having the book close in on itself. But flexibility was more important, especially for the on-the-go reader. As the book evolves and we replace bound texts with flat screens and electronic ink, are these objects and files really books? Does the feel of the cover or the smell of the paper add something crucial to the experience? Or does the magic live only within the words, no matter what their presentation?
Okay, I'll make some of you co-host. Baka kasi na mayroong mga tao sa waiting room, then I'm busy discussing, hindi ko sila mapapasok. So, papasukin niyo na lang sila. So, I'll make some of you co-host. All right. Okay. So yes, just what Angeline mentioned, some of the pre-Gutenberg, the most prominent pre-Gutenberg type of printing is from East Asia, specifically from China and Korea. So this is what it looks like. So they are printing it. Can be in a metal or in a wood, and they pressed it in a paper-like material so that you can be able to transfer the text to that particular paper. So this is one of the pre-Gutenberg type of printing. So here are some characteristics or things about the pre-Gutenberg era. So books were hand copied one at a time. So of course, if you don't have any printing materials, you will write a book manually using your hand. Okay, so most people who are doing this have a lot of time, so that's why they are doing it in a temple where the monks are the one who's writing the book, and also in priest. Okay, sa mga seminaryo, yung mga priest yung gumagawa ng mga libro. So, possible sa isang taon, makapag-produce sila ng isang Bible, yung isang priest. So, ganun ka-scarce yung books during that pre-Gutenberg era. So, information was slow to disseminate. So, walang mga famous author before then. The most famous book is of course the Bible, since that's the main book that is being produced in the mga monasteryo. So those are the books that is the pre-Gutenberg era. Then books limited to upper class of people who could afford them and were literate. So mga upper middle class people are the one who can afford to have a Bible in their house during the pre-Gutenberg era. And books, of course, since very scarce and very valuable, it is being cherished. Okay, unlike now, even though the book is just 10 pesos, no, you will not buy it. Okay, so that's the characteristics of the pre-Gutenberg era. And this is what it looks like. So ito yon, yung wood block na ita-transfer dito sa paper. Okay, so kulayan lang siya. Then, ng ink, then mata-transfer na siya sa paper. So, then ito naman yung mga this how a page of a Bible looks like before the printing press that was invented by Johansen Gutenberg. So this is the pre-Gutenberg era book looks like. Okay. Next is of course the Gutenberg era. So mga characteristics during that time, that's from mid 15th century up until mid 18th century. Okay. So book printing flourished, of course. So since it will be very easy, so it will take years to produce a single Bible before the pre-Gutenberg era. They can be able to do that in weeks. Okay, so that's the difference, big difference. So book printing flourished, information dissemination rapidly increased. So of course, the information rapidly increased. Then books were not limited to upper class of society anymore. So that's what changed before. Okay, so dati yung mga Bible, of course, accessible lang siya sa mga upper middle income family. Pero ngayon, even the lower middle income or even lower class of people can be able to have access to books. Okay, nagsimula nga maging for example, one of the most famous books during the 15th century is the King Arthur and the Legends of the Round Table. So that's a fantasy book. Because of the printing press, even people don't have access to that. Have access to that particular media suddenly. So just imagine the difference with the masses, di ba? Yung libro na na-enjoy lang ng mga hari, mga prince, mga elite people, suddenly it is being mass produced. Then a lot of people are reading it and their fantasy sparks, na-imagine nila yung mga entertainment for kings lang, as they also have access because of the printing press. So books were not limited to upper class of society anymore. Everyone can have access to it. So this is what printing press of Gutenberg looks like. Okay. Next is after the Gutenberg era, mid 18th century to the 19th century, the industrial era. Parang ano yan. Of course, during this time also where the first industrial revolution took place. So parang nagkaroon ng collaboration yung Gutenberg in the first industrial revolution. So ito, meron ng bahid ng steam engine yung pagpiprint. So of course, the tendency is mas mapapabilis. So book volumes and production times were speeded up by mechanical automation because of the steam engine in the first industrial revolution. Type was manufactured with more precision, durability, and speed. Delivery was expedited by better transit, improved roads, rail, and sea. So ito rin yung time na nag-boom yung railroad because of the steam engine nga. So the distribution of books, hindi lang napabilis sa loob ng printing house, but sa labas ng printing house, yung distribution is napabilis din. This is what a book in the industrial era looks like. Then, after the industrial era, this is where the World War I, World War II era, from 1891 to 1983, just before the digital era, which we are currently on right now. So artistic era, technical improvements allowed for more sophisticated analog reproduction, more and easier use of images integrated with text, photo reproduction of words and images sped up, mass communication, assembly, and delivery. So there, it becomes more powerful, the images, and more colorful. Of course, it is more easier to reproduce. Then, of course, after the artistic era, the digital era, the era that we are currently on right now. So as much as kung pinakamurang digital printer ngayon, you can buy a brand new printer from a branded na 5,000 pesos na mayroon ka ng brand new digital laser printer ngayon. So technical improvements using digital process allowed for most sophisticated reproduction. More control for designer who could create all artwork, words and pictures to print from a computer and other digital software, hardware or software. Printing files could be sent instantaneously to local printer for distributed printing. So ganun na kabilis the way we print materials this moment. Okay. So now we'll talk about the offset printing after those overview of the different era. So before we proceed to the offset printing, do you have any questions? So can you give me a thumbs up if we can proceed now to the offset printing? Okay, so I guess everyone's ready. Now we also have the offset printing. So what's this offset printing? So we all know that the first wave of printing machine is literally the printing press. You will press, okay, the paper to the characters to the paper. So that is literally press. Kaya nga hanggang ngayon, di ba, yung pag-publish ng mga media is we call it press because of the machine that was invented by Johannes Gutenberg, the printing press. So hindi na nawala sa natin yan, sa vocabulary yung word na press. Na-associate na natin siya sa lahat ng pag-distribution ng media up until this very moment. So yun pagpe-press. Ito namang offset printing. This is a type of printing where it's not being pressed anymore. So it is being transferred by rolling, okay, the images to the offset. That's why it's called offset printing. Then after offset printing, we also have the digital printing, the printing type that we are most familiar with. Okay, so we have press, literally pressing it, the offset, okay, transferring of images to the finished product, then the digital printing, which are being used by the way we print, okay, using our printer in our house, laser printing. So those are the digital printing. So press, offset, then digital printing.
Offset printing is one of the most common image reproduction methods of the modern age. But what is offset printing, and how does it work? Offset printing begins with the pre-press stage, where digital files are broken down by their color separation and are laser etched onto coated aluminium plates. Each plate is then loaded onto a roller known as the plate cylinder. Each revolution of this cylinder dampens the non-image area of the plate with water from the dampening system. A vegetable oil-based ink is then passed through a series of rollers and finally onto the image area of the plate. This image is then offset onto another cylinder with a rubber blanket. The addition of this process results in a clearer and sharper final image and is where offset printing gets its name. Paper is loaded into the start of the press and is separated by jets of air to ensure that only one piece travels at a time. The paper is passed between the blanket cylinder and the impression cylinder, where it receives the printed image before it's passed on to the next unit to receive the next color. After the page has traveled through each of the units, it is piled at the end of the press with a thin layer of powder separating each page so that the printed image can dry without marking the pages above and below. Offset printing is best suited for larger volume prints, as most of the cost is in the initial setup, and the price per print will fall as the quantity goes up. For more information, visit us at expresscards.com.au.
Okay, so here's the difference between offset and digital printing. The quickest turnarounds is using the digital printer, meaning you will easily get a result that you are after. Kasi pagka control P mo lang, then enter, print agad. Okay? So cost effectiveness for small, small number of printed materials, mag-off ka na, gamitin mo na yung digital printing. Kasi nga, di ba, as I mentioned, You just need to, probably mga 2,500 meron ka ng printer na second hand. So, kapag maliit lang naman for personal use or for family use, of course, digital printing is the most viable or most feasible way for you to choose. So, cost-effective is the digital printer. Pero kapag for a large number of materials that you need to print, okay, so it's better to use the offset printing. Mahal siyang mag-start, pero kapag sobrang dami mo ng piniprint, mas makakamura ka sa pag pinili mo yung offset printing. Then, most accurate color matching is offset. I agree to this because sometimes if you are using a digital printer, di ba, magkakaroon ng tendency na medyo off yung color kasi nga the mixture of ink is sometimes damaged, so medyo off yung color niya kapag print ka sa digitally. So ibang-iba yung nasa screen monitor mo doon sa na-print mo. Unlike sa offset printing, kung ano talaga yung naka-print doon sa may printing sa plate, which is exactly what it looks like doon sa pagkakabitan ng finished product sa offset printing. Diversity of available printing surfaces. So offset pa rin yun. Easier proofing. Digital kasi, di ba? Kapag magkamali ka, edit mo lang, backspace, control P ulit. Eh sa offset printing, nako, kapag nagkamali ka dito, it will be very expensive to change the metal plate, okay, for offset printing. Then single unit customization is digital, unlike it's very bulky for offset printing. And diversity of ink option is offset yung mas ahead doon. Okay, so those are the difference between offset and digital printing. Okay, now let's proceed to some information about Johannes Gutenberg contribution to printing. He is really the catalyst of why we are able to have the information from 500 years ago up until this very moment. Okay. So movable type had been used about 500 years before Gutenberg. It is in Korea and China, but it wasn't viable. Why isn't viable or feasible during that time? The only reason, class, meron bang gustong mag-try na sumagot sa tanong na to? Sabi dito is, of course, before, 500 years before may invento ni Johannes, yung printing press is ginagawa na ang exact the same thing, though manually, walang machine, sa China and Korea 500 years ago. Pero hindi siya viable. Bakit? Ano yung main factor that affects na bakit hindi naging very much successful yung idea? Though same idea, pero hindi siya naging kasing successful nung printing press ni Johansen. Anyone who wants to try? Ano sa tingin nyo naisip yung factor? Doon sa Chinese characters or sa characters ng English characters kung bakit hindi siya naging as successful. Okay, so the reason why it is not as successful or was not feasible is because nandito sa second bullet. The main problem was the huge number of characters, 2,000 plus in these languages, which took considerable time to set up on each page. You know, class, there are thousands of Chinese characters. So roughly around nasa 10,000 Chinese characters. Pero ano lang naman, 2,000 characters lang, mga 2,000 plus characters lang yung kailangan mong ma-recognize or mabasa para makapagbasa ka ng libro, ng newspaper. 2,000 plus characters lang. Pero meron talagang almost 10,000 Chinese characters. Okay? So just imagine the 2,000 plus characters compare sa just at least 26 letters in our alphabet. Okay, so that is the main reason why the printing press or the the woodblock printing of China and Korea was not as successful as the printing press of Johannes Gutenberg because of the number of characters. Okay, so that's the one of the main reason, number one reason kung bakit hindi yun naging successful. Now, Gutenberg was able to combine his knowledge of print manufacturing, a small alphabet, and abundance of paper to prove printing was sustainable. So during that time also, mid-15th century, lahat ng factor, parang lahat ng all the stars in the universe collide para maging successful yung printing press ni Johannes Gutenberg. So meron siyang abundance of paper, okay, and yung alphabet natin is very 26 characters lang, at least 26 characters lang. Then nag-work din siya sa isang industry na related sa pagpiprint sa printing press. So lahat ng factor na yun nag-combine, then yun, nag-spark, pwede kong gawin to. Diba? Parang naglalaro lang siya ng Scrabble. Diba? Pag nagagawa ka ng Scrabble, na bubuuin niyo yung words. So yun. That's why he is able to come up with that kind of invention. Next is he knew about pressing equipment, metal alloys for durable type letters, type mold making, and ink formations to get ink to stick on the metal type so he could succeed in the process. So hindi lang yung abundance ng paper ang available, but also the alloy needed, yung lead, okay, and the ink, the oil needed para mag-stick yung ink sa metal para magdumikit sa papel. So yon, lahat yun naging available din during that time. Kaya naging successful yung printing press ni Johannes Gutenberg. So here's Johannes Gutenberg from 1400 and to 1468. So during that time, actually, ano na yan, masyado na siyang matanda. Na-exceed niya na yung lifespan during that era. Mga lifespan nung during that time is around 40, 50. Pero umabot siya ng 68 years old. That's Johannes Gutenberg. So here's a clip. And ito yung yung mandatory video na kailangan yung panoorin sa lahat ng print production classes ko. Kahit sa ang university kayo, kahit nasa Harvard kayo, kailangan yung panoorin to. So let's watch this.
One-off, but for most people in the Middle Ages, this was an academic problem. They couldn't read or write anyway. During the Middle Ages, books were written out by hand, mostly in monasteries. Often the monks would spend years on a work. Then, in 1450, an invention changed the world. In the German city of Mainz, Johannes Gutenberg invented the technique of printing with movable type. This made it possible to duplicate books in large numbers and at relatively low cost. The technological foundation was laid for the intellectual, political and religious changes of the succeeding centuries. Johannes Gensfleisch, who later changed his name to Gutenberg, was born in Mainz in around 1400. His father was a wealthy merchant. Young Johannes attended the monastic school in Mainz, that much we know, but then his trail goes cold for a while. We only pick it up again in Strasbourg, where he settled in 1434. Here he set up a factory that produced mirrors for pilgrims. These were very popular among the faithful, who hoped thereby to capture something of the charisma emanating from the shrine they were visiting and from the relics it contained. For Gutenberg, it was a lucrative business. there was a flourishing trade in devotional objects. Particularly popular were woodcuts depicting the saints. Woodcut is one of the earliest printing techniques, but it only reached Europe in the early Middle Ages. Here it served primarily for the dissemination of pictures and texts. But cutting these whole-page blocks is a time-consuming process. First, a mirror image of the handwritten page has to be drawn on the block. Then the individual letters have to be carved out. Finally, the block is inked in, and the sheet of paper is laid on top and rubbed hard with a bone tool so that it takes up the ink. By the start of the 15th century, more and more of these page prints were coming onto the market. Occasionally, a number of pages were bound into a book. The trade in these books also gave a boost to manuscript production. Manuscripts had long since ceased to be the exclusive preserve of the monasteries. Secular scribes were doing good business. The establishment of the first universities had created a great demand for books. Libraries were founded, making knowledge in the form of books accessible. Books needed to be cheaper and more quickly available. But that wasn't all. In particular, scholars wanted uniform copies. A new production technique was feverishly sought after. And one of the seekers was Gutenberg. In 1446 he returned to Mainz. Here he found solid financial backers, allowing him to go ahead with his enterprise. His breakthrough came with a brilliant idea. He broke up his text into its constituent parts: letters, punctuation marks, and frequent combinations known as ligatures. These were then combined to form the blocks for printing words, lines, and pages. The characters were cast and could be used in new combinations time and again. A character is produced as follows. On the end of a metal rod, a mirror image of the letter is engraved. This is then pushed into softened copper, producing a pit in the shape of the letter. This matrix, as it's called, acts as the mould for the actual type, which is cast from lead. In order to manufacture the many letters needed quickly and in sufficient quantity, Gutenberg took another important step forward, inventing the hand-casting instrument. It consists of a rectangular channel. The matrix is inserted at one end and molten lead poured into the other. When the instrument is opened, a letter cast in lead is there, ready to be used. As the matrix is reusable, an unlimited number of identical letters can be cast. Finally, the typesetter can begin to combine the letters into lines. In the form, the lines or columns are combined to create the page layout as desired. The result is a mirror image of the page to be printed. The form is now inked in with printer's ink. Gutenberg used a mixture of lampblack, varnish and egg white. Printing can now start. Gutenberg used a special press for this purpose, but he derived the principle from the traditional wine press. Gutenberg's first printed works were official documents, papal decrees, and grammars. But soon he started on a mammoth venture, the Latin Bible. For this project he cast more than 100,000 pieces of type. For more than 2 years, Gutenberg's typesetters and printers worked on the first edition of 180 copies. The text was printed in black letter or Gothic type, based on the handwriting of the day. Finally, the illuminator added the coloured initials and drawings. With his Bible, one of the world's most beautiful printed books, Gutenberg proved that a work printed with movable type could be as aesthetically pleasing as one written by hand. The edition was soon sold out. Gutenberg's contemporaries were impressed. It was the first time a work had been available in such a large edition, and every copy was identical. The written word now had authoritative status. Knowledge of this revolutionary technology was quick to spread. Soon the first printing presses were set up in Cologne, Bamberg and Basel. In Venice, an enterprising publisher named Aldus Manutius began to print the works of the classical authors. His clientele comprised the whole of Europe's humanistic intellectual elite. Manutius employed the most talented printers of the age. They developed the typeface known as Antiqua, which soon spread throughout Europe. "20 years after Gutenberg's invention, the new technology was firmly established. Thousands of titles were marketed in editions of up to 1,000. Books now became affordable for ordinary people. As society grew more literate, the number of potential readers increased. One of Gutenberg's greatest admirers was the reformer Martin Luther. The new art of printing gave him a bright and bold idea. The layman didn't need a priest to tell him what the Bible said. He could read it himself and decide for himself between revealed truth and the false interpretation put about by the church. So Luther had more than 500,000 copies of his German translation of the Bible printed, a huge number for those days. And to disseminate his Protestant message, he had hundreds of thousands of leaflets distributed. But it wasn't just Luther who exploited the new medium. So did the emperor, along with kings and free cities of the empire. Soon, single-sheet leaflets, flyers we would call them, were discovered as a news medium. When an unusual configuration of planets was announced for 1524, the country faced an avalanche of these flyers, warning of an imminent repeat of Noah's flood. The first daily newspaper appeared in Leipzig in 1650. Einkommende Zeitungen it was called, roughly breaking news, and it came out 6 days a week. But the triumphal march of the newspaper did not really begin until steam-powered rotary printing presses appeared in the 19th century. And the offset process ushered in a radical transformation of printing technology. Now the printing and non-printing elements are part of a single continuous surface. First, the page to be printed is transferred by exposure to light onto a thin printing plate. Then the plate is moistened with water so that the non-printing areas do not absorb any ink. Next, the printing ink is applied. This has a greasy element and it adheres to the areas previously exposed to light. In the offset process, the ink is not transferred directly from the form to the paper, but is first offset onto a rubber roller, hence the name, and only then onto the paper. This allows for rapid printing, and lower quality paper can also be used. Offset is the commonest printing process in use today. But in spite of all these modern developments, it was Johannes Gutenberg who laid the foundations of our modern media world. His invention is still regarded as one of the most important in human history. Gutenberg himself did not make a fortune with his invention. He'd not even finished printing his Bible before his financial backer called in the loan. In the legal battle that followed, Gutenberg lost not only his printing press, but also all the Bibles he'd already printed. Soon afterwards, Mainz was occupied by hostile troops. Gutenberg had to go into exile. 3 years later, he was allowed back as an employee of the new archbishop. On the 3rd of February 1468, Johannes Gutenberg died. He was buried in the Franciscan church in Mainz. But his invention of printing with movable type had changed the world forever. One-off.
All right, so yun lang yung video natin, class. So let's have a recap. So we discussed the overview of different printing eras, the pre-Gutenberg, the Gutenberg, the industrial, the artistic, and the digital era, which we are on right now. So we talk about also the life and who is Johannes Gutenberg and his impact to the media, the way we consume and accessibility to media. Johannes Gutenberg, and we also discussed the difference between offset and digital printing. Okay? So may tanong ba kayo, class? So if you don't have any more question, we can now open our webcam and take a class picture. Wait lang. Habang nag-open kayo ng webcam, I'll just paste the attendance link. Sige lang, mamuwas na kayo ng webcam. Here's the attendance link. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, and smile. Okay, first. Okay, isang page lang pala, dalawang page. One moment, don't go anywhere. Second page. 1, 2, and smile. Okay, so there, class. Just click the link for your attendance and answer the one question in there. And if you're done getting the attendance, you can now leave the meeting. Okay, goodbye, everyone.
Sir, meron lang po akong gustong erase po regarding
yes,
po
go.
sa schedule po namin.
Okay.
Pwede po bang ipag-isahin na lang po yung print prod po? Since ang schedule po niyo is Monday and Thursday po.
Mhm.
Parang isang
Yeah.
day na lang po siya. Pwede po.
Yes, every Thursday ko kayo imi-meet.
Sige po. Then, di po pala kayang ipag-isahin yung call center po kasi baka po masagasaan yung susunod po namin.
Oo. So hindi rin siya pwedeng pag-isahin kasi makonsumo ng oras yung call center basic.
Sige, bali
So,
yung ano na lang po, yung print prod na lang po, sir.
So every Thursday ko lang kayo imi-meet sa print production.
Sige po. Thank you po, sir.
Sir?
Ah,
So yung
yes.
pong attendance po, ano po, no longer accepting.
Ay, oo nga. Wait, one moment. Buti nabasa mo. Okay, refresh.
Okay na po.
Alright. Sige, sige. Okay, so if there are no more questions, we can now call it a day. See you on Tuesday. Goodbye.
Thank you po, sir.
Bye po, sir.
Thank you
Thank you
po,
po.
sir.
Sir, thank you po.
Sir, thank you po.
Bye-bye po.
Thank you. Bye-bye.